Hi, I'm Gail Schliemann from BERNINA of Naperville, and I want to show you how to make your own fitted mask. So let's get started with the materials that you're going to need for this. First, there's the pattern. The pattern is available in our description for this video. So go to youtube.com/BERNINA of Naperville, and right in the description of this video, you will see the link. This will also be posted on our homepage at BERNINAofNaperville.com, in addition on our social media. The next most important thing that you're going to need is your interfacing. And this is Craft Fuse interfacing from Pellon. And depending on the kind of mask you're gonna make, we have several that we've made. This one has a layer of interfacing on the top fabric as well as on the bottom fabric. And this is a little bit stiff. This has been pre-washed too, so you can see what they look like after they've been through the wash. We have others that just have a layer on the front, but then the back, the lining does not have stabilizer. And this one is a little bit softer and contours more to your face. However, if you're making these masks for a hospital, most hospitals are recommending that you have 3 to 4 layers for a protective barrier. So that would be 2 layers of fabric and 2 layers of the interfacing. Now this Craft Fuse interfacing is ironable and it sticks down to the wrong side of the material once you've pressed it. Secondly, you're going to need fabric, and our fabric has been pre-washed. And the reason why I like to pre-wash the fabric before I make the masks is that I do want to wash these after I've used them every day, so they go through the wash, and if you pre-wash them, then you make sure that the material is not going to shrink on you after you've made your mask. And a tip: when I throw my stuff in the wash, I put it in the dryer for about 8 minutes, and that's just enough to take the wetness out, and then I take it to the iron and I press it the rest of the way dry. That way the fabric is nice and crisp, and when you make your final project, it looks just like you never laundered your material before. Let's face it, elastic is not easy to come by, but there is some other alternatives that I want to show you. First, we carry some knits, and I've just cut little strips of knit like this that can be made into a tube like this. And I use an overlocker or a serger to do this. Another option would be to use grosgrain ribbon or twill tape or something like that. And so if you don't have a serger and you don't want to use the tubes, just remember that you could substitute that with ribbon or the twill tape. I'm using the BERNINA L450 overlocker serger. This is a 4-thread overlock machine, and I have I'm using 3 threads and 1 needle. In the upper looper, I have woolly nylon. This gives this rolled hem a little elasticity that will help with the springiness in our tubes that we're gonna make. Now, normally you would use a rolled hem for napkins, the edges of a bridal veil, the edges of a flowy skirt or scarf, but in this case we're using it as a tool to turn these tubes. Get started by making a chain that is longer than the piece that we're using. This is 1.25 inches wide and about 12.5 inches long. The mask is going to require 11 inches and 9 inches. So you'll need a 20-inch piece, but I recommend working in the smaller sections. It's easier to manage. Looks like we're there. Now take the right side of your material and place the chain in that middle so that when you fold it together, the chain is inserted in the crease. And now lift your presser foot and get the tube business just in front of the knife and start a little bit of stitching, making sure that this chain on the back doesn't get broken or wiggled. It's important as you go down this tube to not break the chain. and to try to keep your pieces as even as possible over here on the right-hand side. You can see that I'm lining the fold up with the notch in this foot just there. Now, we're going to pull the chain, and we need to get it started by the knit wrapping right under itself with this tube, and then carefully pull the chain, gather up the tube, and work at first in just little bits to turn that piece. And you'll feel it coming and slipping over the fabric. And it just takes, this is the hardest part of this, but once you get it started, it slides right. And there's our tube. Okay, I'm here at my Bernina 325, and I have a few things here I wanted to show you as far as supplies that I'm using at this point. So it's time to sew our mask pieces together. I want to show you that I actually interfaced the inside piece and the outside pieces with the Craft Fuse interfacing. So that's been created, and now I'm simply going to sew these pieces together, and I'm going to sew them together right sides together. Lining them up at the top, lowering my presser foot, and I'm using the edge of the presser foot as my seam allowance. And now I'm going to stitch, doing a few stitches forwards, then using the quick reverse to tack it, and now continuing all the way around the curve. Stop, lifting the presser foot and cutting, and repeating for the lining pieces. And cut. Now, I can recommend trimming your threads at this point just because they kind of get in the way. So trim these little bits here. I don't press at this point. I simply finger press my pieces open at the bridge of the nose. So this is the top part of the pattern, and this is the bridge of the nose piece. So I'm just finger pressing that open. And I'm going to finger press this piece open. And then I'm lining these two pieces together. And I'm pinning. And then pinning at this intersection. And over here at this intersection. Now, if you are a pinner and you like to use pins, you can continue to pin around that curve. Now, what I'm making right now is the mask that has the 11-inch piece and the 9-inch piece. The 9-inch piece goes side to side at the bottom of the mask, and the 11-inch piece goes side to side along the top of the mask. So I'm going to take my 11-inch piece and I'm lining that up right at my seam allowance and putting in a pin. And now I'm going to take the 9-inch piece and do that, a seam allowance from the edge there, and lining this up and putting in a pin. Then I'm going to go over here to the other side, lining up my 11-inch piece here, making sure that I'm pinning not just into the fabric, but also into my face strap. Line this up, my seam allowance from the edge, and I'm inserting a pin. So now we're going to sew from this side all the way around the mask to here, but we have to leave the bottom so that we can turn the mask inside out. Just taking a moment to use my fingers to flatten this mask out so we can get around the bridge of the nose easily. Don't forget to remove the pins before you get to them. You don't want to sew over the pins. That's not good at all. Going to shove this one just a little bit more in there. And now I cut. So we're almost there, folks. We just need to do a little bit of trimming. So we're going to trim our corners, being very careful not to chop the tip of your sewing, but you do want to make a little diagonal cut into these pieces like this, to the top of the nose, to the side here, to this one, and to this one. All right, we're not quite finished with our trimming. We're going to take the tips of our sharp scissors and we're cutting into the curves so that when we flip this, it will be nice and flat when we turn it around. And now I'm going to turn this inside out. The little straps that you've made act as a helper to pull it inside out. And then I'm kind of finger pressing to get everything nice and into shape here. And then we want a nice piece on the bridge of the nose. I can use the ends of my scissors. We don't want to poke too hard, because we don't want what I like to call blowout to happen. That's where your poking device comes out through your seam. But we're going to get all of that into place, and that looks pretty good. So the next thing is I have cut 4 inches of wire, and this 4 inches of wire is going to go over the bridge of the nose area, but it gets inserted up through the mask and into the seam allowance there. And I bend it just so I know where I'm putting the middle on that seam, on that bridge of the nose. So I'm going to push this into place, feeling the bend in the mask, and now taking a pin to hold the wire in, I'm pinning. And then I feel the wire, and I'm feeling that it's also over here. So I'm going to pin. And then I'm feeling for the wire on this side. And sometimes you have to push your thumb or your fingers up in there just to spread the wire open a little bit, because you don't want to sew over that wire. You'll break a needle. And let's talk about needles while I'm doing this pinning. It is really recommended that you change your needle after every 4 to 6 hours of sewing. And for those of you that are assembly line making these scrub caps and the masks, that doesn't take, that time, it adds up. So don't forget to get new needles and replace your needles. And if you accidentally sew over a pin, take that needle out and replace it. All right, my dirge is over. I have my bridge wire pinned into place. And now my final bit here is that I need to fold over my edges here, because I'm going to top stitch all the way around the mask. Now there's a little dip down here in the mask where we sewed it together. And every time we have a dip, we need to create a little snip so that will fold over. Otherwise it won't lay flat. So I've done that here. And then I'm going to do that on the inside piece as well. And now I'm going to line this up in the center, because I've created a little V and a little V. I'm just tucking with my fingers and kind of just moving everything around there. And I'm going to use another pin to pin it into place. We're going to do the same thing on this side to pin into place. So now let's start with the top stitching. So I'm using the inside toe of my foot. So see that little toe, the inside of the right toe of my standard sewing foot. And I'm simply going to stitch that distance along the bottom of my mask. Make sure that you're pulling your tubes away from the needle. And then once I find that seam, I'm going to stop and pivot. And then remove my pin. lift, pivot. Now, as we stitch this piece, we don't want to cut or catch the needle on the wire here, so I'm going to go just a little bit wider with my seam allowance. So we're going to go about 1/4 of an inch rather than 1/8 of an inch. And remember to feel for where that wire is. And don't sew over your pin. And get everything out of the way on the mask. Now we're going to try to stitch right to the middle, but remove your pin. Now I'm right on the seam, so I'm going to lift and pivot and smush and wiggle to come down the other side. And now I'm going to get right to the very edge again with my 1/8 of an inch top stitching. And now pivot and stitch. And just go back a little bit to secure. Bring my needle up, lift my presser foot, and cut. And now I'm going to cut my threads, and I'm going to meet you back at the ironing board to talk about some alternative ways to add the ties onto the mask. If you decide that you want an adjustable head strap for the mask rather than trying to pull something on over your head, this is a very nice alternative. And this one had very minimal alterations to the pattern. I used the pattern straight up, but instead of sewing here and all the way around the mask, I just sewed at the bottom and I sewed along the top. I'm doing a little bit of a different technique for this particular mask. This mask, I left the raw edges showing because we're going to make a casing to feed through an adjustable tube. And with that in mind, I wanted to take an opportunity, if you are not very good at sewing a straight line or sewing something eyeballing it, like we say, there's a couple different feet that you can use here to get a little bit more accuracy. And the first one I'm going to use is the number 37 foot. Now this is a patchwork foot, a 1/4 inch patchwork foot. So quilters tend to use this foot in order to achieve their 1/4 inch seams because the side of this foot to the needle is exactly 1/4 of an inch. So I'm putting that on my machine. And along the bottom and along the top, remember we need to feed this wire through the mask, and this will give us that 1/4 of an inch we need so that we don't sew on the wire of the mask. The next foot that I want to show you is the number 10 edge stitch foot. This foot has a little guide down the middle that is right where the needle center position would be. So we are going to line the bottom of our mask up with this guide, and we're going to move our needle position 3 clicks to the right of center, and that's going to give us a really nice top stitch along the bottom of this mask. So now I'm going to line it up here like so. Don't forget to kind of flatten your mask out when you get to these fun little areas like this. And I'm stopping with my needle down, and I'm wiggling and adjusting right at that seam. And now I can pull my needle up and cut. And I have a really nice seam along the bottom of the mask. Now the next thing I want to do is kind of trim up the sides. Just my interfacing showing just a little bit, so I'm going to trim that. Same on this side. Okay. So once I have that ready to go, I'm going to switch back to my standard number 1 sewing foot, and I'm going to use the needle plate markings on my machine right here. And I'm going to fold this over about 5/8 of an inch. So this is going to be just a straight stitch, putting my needle back to center by pressing the clear button. And all I'm doing right here is just giving myself a fold line. Lift my needle up, trim my thread, and then do the same on the other side. Now, I'm just trimming my threads, and I want to do a stitch along these raw edges so that when these are washed, we don't have any unraveling happening. And guess what? There's also a foot for that, and that is this number 2 overlock foot. Now, of course, if you had a serger, you could use a serger, but we're going to use this number 2 overcasting foot that has a pin right here. And when we butt the raw edges of our material together against that pin and we do an overcast stitch, it's not going to squeeze the edges of our material, and it's going to leave us a nice little zigzag that will save the edges from unraveling in the wash. And I'm actually going to use stitch number 13. I'm going to get my thread under the foot, lining the edge up to that pin. Bringing my needle up, trimming my threads, and repeating for the next side. Trim our threads, and then we're going to fold right on that initial seam line. We're going to change our foot back to our standard sewing foot, and we're going to change our stitch back to our straight stitch. I'm going to sew with the seam side up right down the middle of that overcasting stitch we created. So I'm going to sew a few stitches forward, Then I'm going to go a few stitches backwards all the way to the edge and a few stitches forward. Raise the needle up, cut, and repeat for the next side. Okay, so now I'm going to trim my threads really close, and I'll meet you back at the iron where I'm going to show you how to feed your long tube through. I have this finished mask with the casing on the side here. So all that's necessary now is to take our long tube. This is approximately 40 inches. And the idea is that we're going to feed this down this side, feed this down this side, so it looks like this mask. And I have a tool that I use for that. This comes in a set of 3 different sizes. So all you're going to do is slip your tube through the end of this bodkin. And then we're going to slip this through the casing. Just like that. And the same on the other side. And then I would finish this off by tying a little knot on the end. And then you can see this can be adjustable to go over the head on the face and then tie along the back of the neck. Another option for you, by making a mask this size where we have created casings down the side of the mask like this, we have a piece that, this is like the easy on, easy off mask where it fits right over your face and you can put it behind your ears like this. And so these you might want to adjust per the size of your ears, or you could take a strip like this and feed it through. I'm using my bodkin again. And one thing I think might be nice, since we're making these masks for all different shapes and sizes of people, is you could just take your tubing and tie it in a knot like this, so whoever receives it could adjust the tubing to suit their ear size. Thank you for watching our tutorial today, and hopefully you have enough information to make some masks for yourself, your family, your loved ones, or even a specific cause that you're working on. And as always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville, and like, comment, and if you want to see more videos and be alerted when we add more stuff, just click the little bell and then you'll get an alert every time we upload a new video. So thank you very much and see you next time.